Let's step back in history to an old part of our country that really formed and shaped this country, the Wilderness Road, a gateway to the west, the dark and bloody ground into Kentucky. And everybody remembers the old stories of Daniel Boone. He made this road, but he wasn't the first person on this road, but he made the trace into Kentucky. Travel these old roads nowadays, this is what the modern Wilderness Road looks like. Highway 58 down into Virginia, up into meets US 25E into Kentucky, through the Gap. But parts of the road, long stretches of it are still in existence. They're just off the major highways, just off to the side of them in the old country. But they're still there, and oh, the history it's went through. Now here's the original Wilderness Road in the red, but this is working from up in New England, Philadelphia, all the way down the Shenandoah Valley till it hits the Wilderness Road. And here's all the valleys in the Appalachia in this little map here, and their regions. So much country and so much history. Now here is Cumberland Gap, the gateway to the west. This led out of Virginia into the dark and bloody ground of Kentucky. And it was sheer walls down this Cumberland mountain range. This is Cumberland Mountain here in the Gap, just straight up. And there was only certain places you could cross through these old mountains. You could see just mountain range after mountain range. And people in the east wanted to get off to the west. They had to go through these gaps. And this is a picture of Powell Valley out of Virginia. Goes all the way down into Tennessee. And it's just a sheer mountain range all the way down this valley. And yes, there's certain passes, but nothing is accessible as the Cumberland Gap. This is the White Rocks of Virginia. Here's another view of them. They are just an escarpment out from the valley. And this is looking from the top of them, down into the valley, just sheer bluffs. So they had to go where they could cross, just like you do now with the bridges across waterways. But back in them days, at the start, this is the original Wilderness Road. It was just animal tracing, made by buffalo in the beginning, and animals traveling from migration from one place to another. But the first humans was the Native Americans. And they traveled these ways, these little passes through these mountains for thousands of years before any settlers ever laid eyes on them. These old paths. This is the pathway between the north and the south, as far as the Native Americans used them. Shawnee to the north, Cherokee to the south, and some other little tribes used this country too, but this is mostly a going in between hunting land for these tribes. Kentucky, and a lot of country there. And they used these trails as warpaths. Here's a map of the Indian warpaths they used between the nations. Now the first settlers, or white people in here, let's put it that way, was the long hunters. They was in here, but they was undocumented. They explored this country, the French, the Spanish, even the British. And these old walkways, these old paths, the first documented person in here that's in a journal that's documented to explore it was Thomas Walker. And he come in here in 1750. He was employed by a Lowell Land Company. They was looking to explore 800,000 acres. Here's a map of the way he traveled out of Stratton, Virginia, down through here. And he had 5 guys with him, just old mountaineers exploring. And he kept a good journal day by day. You can go and find this journal and read it. Day by day, his travels exploring this country. And he first seen the Gap. It probably looked like this in the spring of 1750. Come up on it, a natural crossing area in the mountain. And he was the first man to document exploring. This is the Gap Cave, which is really used to be Cudjoe's Cave in Southern Gap. This is the spring, Old Gap Creek. Now this is how a lot of these places got their name. Cumberland Mountain Range got it named by Thomas Walker, named it after the Duke of the Cumberland. Now remember, these were British subjects in them days before the Revolutionary War. And the Cumberland River got the same name. And Ambrose Powell, he went down Powell Valley. That's how it got its name. And he marked all kinds of trees down the valley and along the river. So that's how Powell River got its name. But here's his route that he took, back to where he come from. And in his journal, he claimed that they killed in their travels there 13 buffalo, 53 bear, 20 deer, and 150 turkey. Game was so plentiful. But that was about it for the exploration to the west for the time being, because the French and Indian War had started in 1754, and it lasted a couple of years. Well, this is where Daniel Boone come in. He served under the command with the British in the French and Indian War, and he was born in Pennsylvania and later moved to Watauga Valley in North Carolina. And he got to where he's getting with the Long Hunters and exploring into Kentucky. This is how he found it. It was just so overwhelming to him. He loved it so much. So he'd come back to this country with his brother. He even stayed here 2 years by himself exploring this country into Kentucky and really loved it. Gathering game and hides and skins, only to get stopped by the Native Americans in Powell Valley and took everything that he had accumulated in 2 years and warned him not to come back. But that wouldn't stop him. His first attempt at Kentucky was in 1773, and he talked with the Russell family, 2 groups of parties, to come into Kentucky to settle it. Well, his advance party he had, and there was a party back behind him, the Russell party. Well, his son in a little group got caught in between the country, between the groups, and they stayed all night. Well, they was ambushed by a group of Native Americans the next morning. Here's the signed document. A couple of them escaped, but his son and the Russell sons died. This was the first son he lost in trying to settle Kentucky. Well, he spent the winter in Castlewood, but in the spring of 1775, he was invited by Richard Henderson to go to Watauga shows in present-day Elizabethton, Tennessee, for a treaty to buy some land from the Cherokee. And he took wagon loads of goods and stuff with him down to Watauga shows to trade with the Native Americans, the Cherokee. And they negotiated for a few days, and he managed to make a deal with them. The chief at this time, I don't know if I can pronounce the name right or not, but here's the name. And he traded 200 pounds of sterling silver and 6,000 pounds of goods for 20 million acres into Kentucky, part of Tennessee. What a deal. And here's the land that he was supposed to have purchased. But after the Revolutionary War, Congress would not accept this treaty because really this was owned by the Shawnee just as much as it was the Cherokee, so they didn't honor this deal. But anyway, Boone was hired in March of 1775 with 1,200 men. He led a group of men to clear these trails into Kentucky. In the meantime, there was little forts along the way. This is in Rose Hill, Virginia, Martin Station. Little forts was established along this trail. And they blazed their way into Kentucky, chopping trees, widening the little old animal traces into trails, but still wasn't good enough for a wagon road. They had to walk their horses or ride them through. And here's a map of the Wilderness Road and the places they settled over time. It went up to Hazel Patch, they call it, and it forked off to the left and to the right. And here's a map of the original Wilderness Road. Now down there in the dotted area is the lower part of it where you went to Bean Station to come across Clinch Mountain. So much history here. I'm just touching on the highlights. And they built so many little forts like this along these little communities and little stations where people would settle. They would have their farm outside of these forts, but they would come to the forts when they had Indian problems. And the old gap, this is the gateway to the west. People just started migrating through here, the old Wilderness Road. And this is more or less what it looked like. Really nothing. Not really big enough to pass wagons through just yet. And they had to find places to cross these waterways, these rivers, stuff like this. Some were really bad, so they had to find places to forge them. Their ideal places was finding places like this right here. When the weather was permitting, water wasn't up, they'd cross places like this if they could find them. On up the road. And they built little places like this out away from the forts, the stations, trying to clear land, start them a farm. Low cabins like this. And all the time, the Native American, especially the Cherokee and the Shawnee, was watching them. At first it wasn't too bad, but as more of the settlers come in, they resented white man being in their country. And they watched. And they'd watch these little bands coming through here in little families. But still they came into the dark and bloody ground, they called it. From the east, they worked their way through these mountains, these old trails, these hollers, gaps, into the mountains, into the state of Kentucky. And a lot of these little groups got ambushed. They would kill everybody. They resented them being here, so they would ambush them, destroy little parties. And here's some of the weapons that they used, hand weapons at the time. Clubs, war clubs. And as time went on, they tried to burn them out. Especially when the Revolutionary War started, the British really backed them. They sided with the British, and the British in Detroit was paying money for scalps So this is just what the Native Americans wanted, support to drive the white man out of their country. And it was kill or be killed. And here's a group of travelers around London, Kentucky that got massacred one night, October 3rd, 1786. Even after the Revolutionary War, it was still going on. Now, Chief Doublehead, he never was. He resented the white man. He'd do everything in his power to get him out of here. But he suddenly died. And things started to cool down a little bit. But they still had this trouble. This went on till even after statehood, when Kentucky became a state in 1794. And here's some of the old, this is live pictures around the Civil War time of the road, Wilderness Road across Cumberland Gap Mountain. How rough the roads was. Now, during the Civil War, this is a picture of what the Gap looked like in the Civil War. It was changed hands 4 times. At first, the Confederates had it in 61 to 62, then the North had it in 62 to 63, then the South took it back in 63, 64, and then from 64 to 65, the Union kept it to the end of the war. And all they done was just surrounded them and put them under siege and starved each other out. But these are the live pictures of it right here. 1962 pictures of the Gap. And thousands upon thousands of soldiers marched through here. Bragg brought his army through here after he retreated from the Battle of Perrysville in Kentucky in 62. But there never was no major battles here. There was a lot of skirmishes for positions around the Gap, but no major in battle. Either side was not brave enough or foolish enough to try to take the defenses of the Gap. In the old Gap, there's so much stories here of the Civil War, things that's happened, but they said that the Confederates, the first of the war, brought up a gun from the eastern coast, a big old gun they called Long Tom. Big Parrot gun, claimed it. It was a heavy gun, but it had a range of 5 miles. And they changed hands with it, but here's the range of this gun. 5-mile range from the Gap on top of the pinnacle. And either side would use it, but they'd just take pot shot at each other, no major engagement with it. But when one side would retreat, the other push it over, they'd spike it, push it over the hill, and then the other one would get it, take it back on top, spike it, push it back over the hill, back and forth on top of this mountain. But here's the Gap after the Civil War, in ruin. And it stayed this way for a long time, slowly rebuilding, trying to rebuild after the Civil War. The roads were just awful. And they mostly used the old Wilderness Road then for moving livestock from in the farms and stuff, these plantations out of Kentucky, down into Tennessee, Knoxville and stuff, so they could trade with them. Well, these roads were in pretty bad shape. And this is a picture sometime just after the Civil War or during the Civil War of the Gap. The road that goes across the Gap, the original Wilderness Road. Here's another picture. This is in the late 1800s. In the state, between the states, Virginia and Kentucky, they started working on the roads, trying to develop the commerce. And here's what Cumberland Gap looked like in the late 1800s. About the time of the big land boom. Here they are working on Cumberland Mountain, trying to improve the road, late 1800s, with steam equipment before the combustible engine. Here's another picture. See the old big steamroller there? They're trying to put gravel on the road, make a road bed, pack it. This is around 1890. And the old Wilderness Road through Minnesboro, up through the Narrows of Pineville, on up into Kentucky. This is the original picture of it, on Yellow Creek. And it improved over time. The roads like this, 2-lane roads, paved. But them roads are still out there. They're just off the modern road, crisscrossing back and forth. Even the old Cumberland Mountain here, the old road. And in the 50s, early 50s, the National Park Service made Cumberland Gap and this mountain range area a national park. And they've improved the place greatly. And they keep it up. And the old road went across the mountain. The old people remember this. It's old Cudjoe's Cave here on Cumberland Mountain above the Gap. Good tourist season. This place was loaded with traffic. And right across the road from it was old Cudjoe's Cave tourist. Bought many a cigarettes there. Going to work back and forth out of these coal mines out of Kentucky. Old times remembered. But that road went away. They started in 1985 building a tunnel through the mountain to do away with this road they called across the mountain Massacre Mountain. So many people had died in accidents. And they opened it up in 1996, 1996, a little over a mile long. Cumberland Mountain, Cumberland Gap Tunnel, 25E. And old Boone, yes, he settled Kentucky, big part of it, and exploring it. But as time went on, he had troubles with holding on to his land dealings and all this, so he finally just sold out what he had, since they turned him so dirty on some deals, that he went into Missouri. That's where he lived the rest of his life and died, him and his wife. But later on, the state of Kentucky brought him home to Frankfort and buried him. Now, the old Wilderness Road, it went from an old animal trace trail, the warpath from Native Americans, to the modern highway. But you gotta remember, these old modern highways that cover the old Wilderness Road, so many settlers died between them and the Native Americans on this old road. They was buried right on the side of the trail. So many settlers, countless, hundreds of people are buried under these new roads and don't even know it. No markers, no nothing. So I hope you enjoy this little history. I only scratched the surface. This history is so deep. So I want to thank you for watching. God bless, and I'll see you next time.